Welcome to
Hey.
the Rich in Purpose Childhood Trauma Summit. Today we're here with Kelly Wilson from Map Your Healing Journey, and we're going to talk about PTSD and grief recovery. Welcome, Kelly.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Kelly, I want to just tell everybody what an extraordinary person you are. This lady, she's a trauma coach in PTSD and grief recovery. She's a best-selling author, a comedian, and a mother. So if you think we're talking to someone special today, we are. So, Kelly, tell us a little bit about PTSD, how you became you wanted to focus on that part of the trauma, and how you started your business.
I focus on PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, because I was diagnosed with it in 2006. I'm a survivor of childhood sexual abuse by my father, and abuse like that does not happen in a vacuum. So there's all different kinds of abuse that travel together. And when I was a mother of two small children, I started having symptoms that caused me not to be able to function. So I decided to get some help from a therapist and discovered that those symptoms were actually triggers from post traumatic stress disorder. And that is what I consider the beginning of my recovery journey. And that was yeah, almost 20 years ago now. So,
Mhm. But
for my, oh, I'm sorry.
oh, no, go ahead.
To start my business, okay, so in 2020, I met a therapist who works with people who have PTSD using a treatment method that I call PTSD remediation because it's a much shorter name and easier to say than the actual longer name that is very difficult for me to remember. But it has to do with the vagus nerve. And he said PTSD remediation gets rid of PTSD symptoms. And I said, no, they don't. So we had this conversation for a while, like over some months. And then I said to myself, why not try it? The worst thing that can happen is that you'll be right where you are now. So I told him, yeah, let's go ahead and try it. And what this technique does is that it activates the vagus nerve in a very specific way to allow the amygdala to dump out everything that's stored so that you can process it emotionally in your body, cognitively, somatically. Um, and then within 10 to 12 weeks, the PTSD symptoms are gone. So you don't deal with them anymore. Um, and I will say that healing trauma and going through the grief process um, is so much easier to do without those PTSD symptoms all the time. So once I was done, like I started on July 24th, 2020, and then my last PTSD trigger was September 26th, 2020. And after that, um, the brain kind of has to adjust as it gets used to rewiring and not having PTSD. And as I was going through that process, I thought, well, this is amazing. I can't keep this to myself. So I decided to go into trauma recovery with an emphasis on PTSD recovery. And then I, it's weird to say, but I am a fan of grief. Like I I consider myself friends with it, and so I added grief recovery to the mix as well.
Wow. So many times, especially when we've experienced trauma, we don't know we're being triggered, right?
Yes.
We get anxious or we get something happens, but we don't call it a trigger. We just think it's part of our life. Tell us, Kelly, like how did you said you started so that you couldn't really function and life was becoming hard. Tell us a little bit about those types of things that were happening to you? Because again, somebody might have PTSD and really not even realize it.
For me, the triggers started with more visual triggers. So I associated some of my abuse experiences with Santa. And so one that year in 2006, I saw my husband at the time put on a Santa mask, and he was playing around. He wasn't trying to do anything scary or anything, but I was terrified. I
Oh,
started sweating. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't hear. Um, I couldn't think. I had to sit down. I started hyperventilating. So basically, the body's physiological response does not match what's going on. My brain, or my nervous system in my brain, saw Santa and went back to that moment where I had experienced that abuse and then made that connection with Santa. So in that moment, like my in PTSD, like our fight or flight is stuck on all the time. So we never get to rest. We're always on guard, and that's another symptom. Um, Easily startled is another one. Um, Not just visual flashbacks like I was talking about, but emotional flashbacks. So if you experience the not being good enough for somebody, and like with a parent, and then you grow up and you get married and then you have that same pattern, that's you'll have a physiological response to that. That's part of the pattern too. Sleep disturbances, sometimes they are due to age and hormonal shifts and those kinds of things, but also trauma affects us greatly when it comes to sleep patterns. Um, Also, avoiding things is big, and getting into finding ourselves just like in loops of negative thinking. So, self blame is a big part of that because as children, it's safer to blame ourselves than to blame the people who are um, traumatizing us. So, those are some of them.
well, when we're kids, we try to find that safe place, right? And
Yes.
we try not to. And so, in as adults, we can really find those safe places, the same as we did when we were in childhood trauma, because our brains are kind of stuck in that particular moment or in that
Hmm.
particular time in our life. I want to ask
Right.
you. I want to ask you, Kelly. Uh, Awareness, and then not being able to, not really addressing it, avoidance, I think was the word that you used. How do if because procrastination, right? It's a fear of actually succeeding, or a fear of actually accomplishing what you really want to accomplish sometimes. Tell me, if I were to come to you and say, look, I really am an entrepreneur, I really
Mm.
want to start this business, but for some reason, I avoid maybe raising the money that I need to do it, or I avoid calling on people that can use my product. How would you help me in that situation?
I work in a combination of with a combination of intuition and also practical strategies. So I use them both.
Okay.
And I think the first way that I approach whatever clients bring to me is just with pure curiosity. So I'm inherently curious. I love being curious. I love asking questions. And um, that's how I would start. Things like, when is there a point at which this first started? What is it like to procrastinate for you? Um, because like we have these assumptions that when you say procrastination, I assume that we're thinking the same thing or we're feeling the same thing, and we're not. Procrastination for you can be totally different than it is for me. So, really digging into what is that like for you? Like making the connection with that, with the source of that experience, I think opens up so many doors. Even between, like, typically I'll see clients once a week. And it will, like, once the brain knows that, oh, you're asking questions of me, you want to know me, and I'm safe, then it starts. Like, you just start, the wheels start turning. It's awesome. It's awesome to see. And people give me a lot of credit for, oh, you helped me do this, you helped me do that. I'm like, okay. But you and your brain, you're like, you're open, you're doing the work, you're accepting yourself, you're going forward on this journey. It is awesome to work with people in those circumstances. I love it.
Well, the one thing that I've noticed when I'm interviewing speakers is that transformation came to them when they found someone that cared. And I think that,
Yes.
that is the thing that you can, with answering like asking questions, right? Really kind of gets people to know that she cares. And
Hmm.
I guess if tell us a little bit about, again, I think it's the caring part. So, that once you say that, okay, this is your form of procrastination, or this is something that I see that you're doing on a regular basis, how do you address that and get them to move forward? Because you are asking them for a moment, right, to become unsafe.
Yes. And having or providing that safe container where they have the opportunity to be unsafe in a safe place, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
um and when I've worked with people, because I also work with people who have ADHD, and so, you know and procrastination comes up a lot. Like, why can't I get started? What is with me, like putting this off until the last minute and those kinds of things. Um, Typically, there are really good reasons, and we cover those really good reasons and those really good motivations and those protections with shame. So many times when what we work with first is, you know, not starting with like the deepest question, because nobody's going to feel safe starting with that, but starting with just like the practical questions. And then as we get a little bit deeper, some of the more intuitive questions, like, do you feel like this? Have you had an experience like this? Kind of honing in on that. Um, and then basically, like, taking the shame and looking at it kind of all the way around and see if we can go underneath it. Like, if you go underneath it, if you can get underneath that shame, that's where the magic is. And it can be a little bit painful, but the benefits far outweigh the little bit of discomfort that you feel going underneath and then finding out what's under there. And then, it's like this package that comes in the mail and you don't know what's in it. And then together we get to open it and start taking things out. Oh, what does this mean? What does that mean? And eventually there's a whole picture, a story that comes together that ex- that you get to explain to yourself, oh, this is why. This is what I'm trying to do. This is how this is why I put all of these things in the box, and this is why the shame sits on top of it, and this is how it manifests. It manifests through procrastination.
Well, and so many times I think with trauma, we don't realize that we're doing something because that's what we've always done, right?
Yeah.
And we just happen to feel shame, and we might not even know why we're feeling shame, but we feel shame, in that particular instance, and then all of a sudden it's triggered in other areas.
Yeah.
Um, I think that with PTSD, which is a little bit different than some traumas, but it's kind of carried with you, so, and it would seem to me like that you could be triggered more easily than if then like if you had childhood trauma, there could be times when you always do the same thing. Like I told you, I have a not a good relationship with money, and
Mm,
I would do money in always the same way, and you think it's kind of normal, right? But I think that how do you get people to kind of, and it is to trust you, to start digging down into those places where you have shame here, but there's shame here too. And I think
mm,
when you said you were sexually abused by your father, yeah,
mm-hmm,
yeah. I mean, that is something that's very, very hard. For one, somebody that's supposed to love you and take care of you, right? And,
mm-hmm,
and that is just the opposite of what happened. So tell me a little bit uh, how you overcame that shame, and now you're helping people overcome shame like that. To me,
mm,
that's it's just so important, Kelly, for people to not feel so much shame that they won't reach out to get help.
mm.
Because the one thing we don't want to do is get to our end of life and have all of this music inside of us, but we didn't address the few things that happened when we were a child and we didn't
Yeah.
live life that we could. So if you keep that in mind and you know that we all have that in vision, tell me how you deal with the different levels of shame, that self worth that comes with it, because
Mm,
a lady that's been sexually abused by her father, that has to be something that what caused me for that to happen, right? Because you kind of
yes.
tracked it. What caused that to happen to me? Tell me a little bit about your thought process on that.
Um, well, I think first, we're not taught to recognize shame for what it is. Like people typically will come to me and say, I feel bad or I feel depressed. Um, and a lot of times feeling bad or depression can be grief instead, or it can be shame instead, or it can be a combination of things. Um, One important thing about shame is first learning that it's an attachment. It's an attaching emotion. So it doesn't stand by itself. It's always going to attach to something. And so that tells me and tells my and then I tell my clients, one of the things that you can do to bring in strength, because we don't always want to attack things, we want to bring in strength too,
Right.
is to learn for yourself what emotions feel like. So you start with the four: happy, sad, mad, scared. um, and those are the big four that they use in comedy too. um, and start with that, or with those four, and then you can kind of branch out. And there are a lot of resources out there that help identify, like the feelings wheel, um, that help identify like what feelings are where with those foundational four, and then how what the names are, because when we name something, then it becomes part of who we are and we can identify it, and then connecting, okay, how does that emotion feel in the body? How do I feel anger? How do I feel irritation? How do I feel rage? What are the different levels of the emotions? Another thing about shame is that it is a protector. And so for me to see shame as a protection was really important, because then I didn't have to be afraid of it and I didn't have to fight it. I could, it was easier for me to make friends with it and to say, okay, I see you, shame. I see that you're attached to joy, because shame can attach to the more positive emotions. I see that you're attached to this joy. What are you trying to protect me from? Because once you see the shame and the emotions as a relationship, you can talk to them, you can be friends with them. It doesn't have to be a fight or a repression, or you don't have to get rid of them. They can You can just be together. um And then, so identifying shame, learning that it's a protection, and also learning that it's evolutionary. Like it's not something that we can just get rid of because we are designed to be social creatures, and being in a group is safer in an evolutionary sense than it is to be alone, because to be alone out in nature means that you die. So, as a child being sexually abused, I could not I could not place the responsibility on my parents as perpetrators. Instead, in order to stay alive in my child brain, I had to turn that blame inward. And that creates a ton of shame. So, understanding those things about shame um, helped a lot as far as being able to see how it kind of attaches and sits on, for me, it sits on top of things. That's why I say that. And so, if I kind of sit with it and sink and go underneath, then I know that what I need to know or what I need to heal is underneath there.
Well, I've learned so much just in this little presentation.
I was hoping
Um,
that makes sense.
well, but being aware, right, that
Yes,
shame is a protection, which I didn't know, and then being able to interpret that in a certain way, I think, and in a positive way, is again, those are the reasons why people really need to look for coaches and therapists and people that really want to help them, because otherwise you'll go through your whole life and not realize that shame was a protection, and you'll think it's a bad thing, and it's really,
right.
something that you have to deal with, and it's a good thing for you.
Yeah. Hmm.
But then also, I think the one thing, Kelly, is that so many people go through life, you know, grieving about certain things. Right? You don't have to have a death in your family to feel grief. So tell us a little bit about how you help people with the grief recovery. And then I would think that it kind of overlaps a little bit sometimes with the PTSD. So kind of tell us a little bit, maybe it overlaps in this way, but just so we kind of understand grief.
Um, One of the things that I learned for myself about probably 10 years ago is that you don't get trauma without grief, because we grieve what we had and then we grieve what we didn't have. And those are very profound grieving opportunities, but they also create healing. And there's kind of no way around it. And so if you have PTSD, if you have childhood trauma, grief is part of your process. That's just the way that it is. And so I thought, especially when I was opening my business, and getting my certifications and doing these things, I thought, it would be really helpful to learn more about how to work with people through their own grief process. Um, so I decided to include it. I went with the grief recovery method for a few reasons, and this was several years ago. I would say within probably 6 or 7 years, that at the time there wasn't a lot out there as far as certifications went. Um, and also, I love school. I'm good at school, and the grief recovery method specifically has a structure. And for me, structure offers a lot of freedom. And so I thought, if you start with structure, if you know what the rules are, then you can break them, right? So I really appreciate that format. It it allows people to, like, first it educates whoever decides to go through it. Um, it's educational about what grief is and what it isn't, what the myths are are that we grow up with, that we're taught in different places. Just because in our culture, we're not taught how to grieve. We're not taught how to process the losses that we experience on a regular basis. Um, and then the grief recovery method takes people through a process to help acknowledge what has happened, grieve what you had, grieve what you didn't have, take responsibility for yourself, put responsibility where it belongs, write it out, and then, most importantly, be witnessed because trauma and grief need a witness. Some kind of witness, typically, another person, because abuse happens in relationship, healing happens in relationship. And it can be kind of confusing for those of us who have experienced a lot of, especially childhood trauma, to figure out what's safe or not. And that's why also I like, the grief recovery method is solid. It's been around for like 20 years. They have excellent training programs. It's a safe program for people.
Well, you said some people don't understand grief, or they do understand grief. I really don't know sometimes. My mother was in a car accident at 40, and one day she was with us, the next day, no. And
Yeah.
and that was in 1984, I think. I'm not 100% sure that I've actually grieved through the whole thing. I think I've
Hmm.
suppressed it a little bit, and I get over it now. So tell me, I guess, a little bit, and I don't understand sometimes whether I'm over the grief or if I'm just buried the grief. So tell me a little bit
Mm.
about how I might know that.
Um, I like to think about grief as a relationship. So thinking about um, what your relationship is with that grief event, maybe, because sometimes there are events, and then sometimes, like in childhood trauma, they are um, more complicated because grief can be more complicated. Typically, though, like if you were to meet with somebody like me and you were to say, I'm not sure I've processed it. I think I've buried it a little bit. You're probably right because a lot of us don't really know what's going on inside of us until we've expressed it in some way. So for me, that expression largely is writing, but also I go to therapy still. Like sometimes I'll say things in therapy and I was like, I didn't know I felt like that. you know? So and so if I were working with you, I would say, tell me more about the burying part. Like, what's that like for you? And who knows what you would say, but you would have insight as to where that grief is and how you feel about it, and maybe even what you've done with it. And then, if you wanted to do anything with it. So sometimes it just comes out in the moment.
We lived in Michigan. My grandmother lived in Missouri, so we had two funerals, and
Oh,
I just wanted it to be over.
yeah.
Uh, so the burial took place, and it was an accident, so we had a closed casket. So basically, you went through, you didn't see the person, right? It was like 1 minute they're there, and then the
Mm,
next minute they're gone.
yes.
But and I had a hard time like crying and all of that type of stuff. And I did just want it to go away. So I really didn't really kind of want to explore it or anything like that. So I guess, for someone like myself, and the one thing the Apostle Paul says, if you're going through it, there's many other people that are going through the same thing. So I
Yeah.
guess, if you can, like if I were to come into your office or you were to meet me, what are some questions that you might ask to know that mainly I buried the grief, but I haven't dealt with it.
Oh, I would ask first questions about the circumstances just to get some context on what happened. Um, and then I would go off, I would have questions based on the answers that you provided. So, like the two funerals, I'm curious about that. I'm curious that you didn't feel like you had the freedom to cry when you needed to. I'm curious how your family came together or did not during that time. I'm curious what people said, the words that they used. Um, I'm curious what happened afterward when everybody went home and the casserole stopped coming in. Um, so, and those stories would tell me a lot, but they would also tell you a lot. Like, oh, I haven't populated that memory, and it's like holding those memories in your hand and like looking at it from all different kinds of angles. And what I found is that like questions lead to stories, lead to more questions, lead to more stories, lead to more questions, lead to epiphanies. Like, oh, I didn't realize that. Yeah. So it kind of depends on the experience.
Yeah, because I just really believe that so many people they that things happen in their life, and instead of dealing with it, right, especially if you've had childhood trauma, that and you think that I just don't want to deal with this, and so it's just another thing that kind of adds up into your body, right? We know that now trauma is kind of kept in your body. You
Right.
you get to those types of things, and I guess, the thing that kind of gets me a little bit is that we want things to happen fast, right? Let me come
Yes.
and talk to you, and we'll spend 4 times together. And all of the things that happened to me for my childhood, I want you to solve in 4 months or 4 weeks. Tell me a little bit about how you can, I guess, bond with someone and and keep them going so that they want to solve this trauma and live a better life. So it's not like, okay, is there a quick win, I guess, for someone that's went through trauma when they're dealing with you, and you can say, you know if I'd have known that 6 years ago, I wouldn't be in the situation that I'm in now. So how do you pick up on
Mm. Are there quick wins? Statistically, and I learned this in the ADHD coaching program that I was in, it takes 12 sessions to see um what's the word I want? Hello, menopause. Um it takes 12 sessions to see a change. So, one of the things that well, many of the things that we talk about are because people don't come to me when they're doing great. They come to me when they're miserable, which I tell them is a great place to be because that's where the magic happens. And it's true. The magic happens in misery. And it's very evident, like, in what ways people are miserable. And so in 12 weeks, you're not going to be the same. Like, my clients are not the same in 12 weeks when they start out. And that momentum builds on itself because, like I said, people give me credit. I don't deserve the credit. They deserve the credit because they're the ones who have opened. They're the ones who are allowing me to witness and to ask the questions, and they are allowing the process to move forward. Because we either deal with trauma and grief or trauma and grief deals with us. So yeah, I would say quick wins, no. Um, but measurable wins in a relatively short amount of time if you think about it. If you go 12 consecutive weeks is 3 months. You can do a lot in 3 months.
Well, I mean, 12 weeks would be it would be a pretty quick win, right? When you have been,
Yeah.
for me, I know I look 35, but I'm 65. Um, but for me to start like trying to trying to solve my childhood trauma in my 50s, it happened when I was in my early, young and early teens. So you have 50 years or 40 years, and you think, well, okay, let me meet with Kelly here, and um, in 3 weeks, I want to be healed, right?
Oh, wow.
Should have, I should have some, like you said, meaningful, um, something meaningful has happened. And I think that in 12 weeks, I would think that something that I'd been carrying for 40 years to have even a little bit of a chisel into it
Hmm.
would be a big win, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
Like, I, and I,
definitely.
and because so many times, right, we just learn to live the life dealing with the trauma, right? So how many times do you hear people that's just like me? I'm just that person. And
Mm,
they don't really
yeah.
want to be that person, right? With the temper, or the person that binges on the weekends, but they are. And
Hmm.
they just stay there because they don't seek the help that they really need. I guess for this question, it's just that how do we how do we just move forward in life and not stay stuck? Because
Mm,
and we talked a little bit about this before we started talking, is that we're typically the people that are watching these videos are an overachievers, and we get
mm,
to a certain level, and then we don't know how to get to this level. And so, really, it's our trauma that is keeping us stuck at this level. It's not something that we haven't learned. It's not something that we should do. It's just that we don't know how to get past here. Tell me
mm.
a little bit about how I can get past here, right? I can come to you and work through the trauma, and we'll just say that I I don't have my own business. I work for someone else, but I don't like to ask for raises because I'm not, our worthiness. Do we deserve another raise? And what rejection? What if they say no, right? And so sometimes, Kelly, what I've noticed, and happened to me quite often when I was younger, was that I would just go into a whole new industry. I would be in
Yeah.
I would be in advertising, and now I'm going into construction, right? Because I'm meeting all new
Yeah.
people and I'm meeting all new stuff, and I I know I can do better in this business, and we get to the same level. So tell me a little bit about how really kind of what our mind processes in that scenario.
One big thing that occurs to me first is imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is really common, especially among trauma survivors, childhood trauma survivors. And it's number two, the second thing that occurs to me, it is uncomfortable. So that's kind of a double whammy because imposter syndrome is a nice label for a bunch of messy things. And the degree of messiness really depends on what you're dealing with on the inside. So if it was easy to solve, we'd all solve it, right? I'm sure if there was a magical book or whatever, we'd have read it and it would be done. But, everybody is individual and so their imposter syndrome is individual. And dealing with something like imposter syndrome is uncomfortable. And one of the things, especially overachievers, find difficult and have not been taught how to do, as most of us have not been taught how to do, is to sit in the discomfort. So to be willing to be uncomfortable and then to be willing to dig down, like if you want to go up, then you have to sink down with someone, a witness to your trauma and grief. Um, those two things can be kind of difficult to consider and commit to, but at the same time, your life will be changed forever, like in a good way. So it won't just be about your imposter syndrome. It will be about your nervous system and your brain and your relationships and your feelings and your emotions. You know what I mean? So it's these things are about the whole person, not just about, trying to get higher in your company, which is related,
Right.
right?
Well, I think, Kelly, we need to going to wrap this up a little bit, but if you have one thing that you say, you can just tell people that said, look, you've experienced the childhood trauma. You, you, you've made some progress, obviously, because if you become a high achiever, right, you get progress and you get wins to get to this particular level. What is that one thing that you can say, concentrate on this, and at least you're going to get somewhere, right? Instead
Mm,
of instead of concentrating on just everything, right, or not
right.
concentrating on it at all. I found that, you can say I found 80% of my clients or most of my clients, once they realize this, they can start moving forward.
Oh, this is my favorite. And this is my favorite thing to tell people all the time. Build community, invest in community. It Community covers all kinds of um all kinds of elements that we need to deal with as trauma survivors. Relationships, help, asking for help, giving back, taking what we need, um, feeling good about ourselves, the reflecting back where we need to heal. It's Community is so important, and I can't say enough about that.
Oh, well, great. Because, and again, a lot of times we get into this trauma and we isolate ourselves.
Yes.
There's a lot of things we just tell people, oh, I'm busy, and we create the atmosphere so that we can isolate ourselves. And building community again probably is something that you almost need coaching to do, right? Unless,
Yes.
unless
Somewhat.
you
Hmm.
unless you have, like I grew up in the restaurant business, so I'm used to talking to people. But if you didn't have that, right, and you're not used to talking to people, it would take a coach, right, to kind of get you out into the community where really that's where you're going to experience healing.
Yes, absolutely. And that would be a great measurable skill to figure out in 12 weeks, actually.
Yeah. Well, I mean, see, we've solved the problem already here tonight. So,
Hallelujah.
yeah. But Kelly, tell people, we're going to put it on the screen, but just tell them how, if they've connected with you and what their concerns are aligns with what you're doing. How can they get a hold of you and talk about you helping them get to the next level?
People can find me all over the internet um, with Map Your Healing Journey. My website address is mapyourhealing.com, and then email kelly@mapyourhealing.com.
Well, Kelly, thank you so much. Again, I learned a lot today, and I'm sure the people in the audience have learned a lot today. And thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to come and try to help us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.